The human named Rian moved through the fractured tunnels of the crashed vessel with a calm determination that contrasted sharply with the chaos around him, as burning alloy sheets glowed with fading heat, and the smoke of ruptured conduits drifted upward in weak spirals while his helmet lights cut through the haze, revealing shattered passageways and fallen debris that marked the ship's violent descent onto the barren plain of the planet, known to explorers as Dryathan, or jagged canyons. Cut through the gray earth, like scars from ancient battles and winds, carried strange mineral dust that shimmered faintly in the dim light of the distant sun. And despite all of this destruction, Rian kept moving forward because he had heard a faint cry, the unmistakable sound of a young voice calling for help, though nearly smothered by the groan of ruptured metal and the crackle of unstable energy fields. And he felt something within him tighten, a familiar instinct urging him to act, because although he had seen many worlds and met countless species, the sound of someone young in danger was universal and not something he could ignore no matter where he found himself. And so he pushed aside the fallen being, braced his shoulder against a crushed support frame, and forced his way into a narrow chamber where a small alien child crouched trapped beneath a warped panel, who looked up with eyes wide and luminous, a shade of violet that seemed to shift with emotion as the child's breath trembled and the glow of their skin pulsed like fading embers struggling to stay lit. And Rian wasted no time anchoring his boots into the floor and lifting the panel with a surge of effort while the metal scraped harshly, and the child flinched but did not look away. And when the last of the weight shifted free, Rian pulled the child gently into his arms, shielding them as another collapse shook the ship and dust rained from above. Yet he held firm, bracing his frame against the nearest support until the tremor passed, and only then did he begin to move again, following the flickering emergency lights, leading toward the shattered hull where the outside air welcomed them with its cool dryness, and the wind swept across the dew, planes carrying the scent of minerals and distant storms. And as he set the child down, he noticed figures approaching, tall armored forms moving with a mixture of urgency and discipline, their steps echoing across the rocky ground. And at their head walked a towering presence draped in iridescent royal armor and carrying a staff whose edges shimmered with controlled energy, and her eyes locked onto the child, her posture tense with relief and rising fury at the sight of the crushed wreckage around them. And this was the Queen of the Dryathan, a ruler known not only for her authority over the many tribes of her world, but for her fierce devotion to her people, especially her young, who were considered sacred among them. And she moved swiftly, kneeling beside the child, whose voice trembled out a few soft words that made the queen's expression shift from cold anger to profound gratitude as she turned toward Rian and examined him with a gaze that felt heavier than any armor, as if she could see not just the present moment, but every choice that had led him here. And though the surrounding warriors maintained their disciplined formation, their eyes flicked between Rian and their queen with the tension of those who sensed that something important had just occurred, something that would not be easily set aside. And the queen rose, slowly approaching him until she stood only a short distance away, and her voice carried a resonance that felt both commanding and warm as she declared that he had not merely saved a child, but had saved her child, the heir of her line, a small innocent who represented the future of their people. And therefore his actions reached beyond gratitude and into something deeper, something binding. Within the traditions of her world, where such a rescue created a powerful obligation, one that could not be dismissed. And Rian felt the intensity of her words like a wave pressing against him, though he tried to remain calm, explaining gently that anyone would have acted the same, that he had done only what he hoped others would do for one of his own, and that he did not seek reward or recognition. But the queen's gaze did not soften at his humility, for among her people such words only strengthened the bond that now formed around him, and she announced with unwavering conviction that by ancient law, by custom, and by her own will, he was now bound to the royal family, not as a servant or a mere guest, but as someone claimed by the queen herself, a guardian, a protector, a companion, chosen not by chance, but by the actions he had taken and the courage he had shown. And the warriors around her bowed their heads in acknowledgment of this pronouncement, while Rian stood frozen, in surprise, aware that he had stepped into something far larger than he could have anticipated. And yet the queen continued approaching him with a slow, purposeful stride until she was close enough that he could see the shifting light across the plates of her armor and the strange luminous patterns on her skin that marked her as royalty. And she spoke again, informing him that he would not leave her world, that his fate now intertwined with hers and the future of her child. And when Rian opened his mouth to object, to insist that he was only a traveler, that he had duties elsewhere, that he had no intention of disrupting the life of a sovereign or stepping into the politics of another world, she raised her hand in a gesture that carried such weight, such certainty, that his voice caught before the words formed. And she told him softly, yet with unshakable authority, that when someone saved what was most precious to her, she did not allow them to disappear into the void. She did not permit them to leave, and she would not permit him, and he felt the gravity of her words settle upon him as the wind rushed across the plains and the ship behind him groaned in its final collapse, sending a cascade of dust into the air, while the child he had rescued stepped forward, taking his hand with small trembling fingers, as if silently asking him to stay, to remain where safety and gratitude awaited him. And the queen watched this with an expression that mixed fierce protectiveness and something else, something like the beginnings of trust or perhaps attachment, as she gestured for him to follow her back toward the towering crystalline structures that marked the edge of her city, a place shimmering with alien beauty, where spires rose like carved gemstones, reflecting the strange sunlight across wide courtyards and grand halls. And though Rian had not planned to stay, though he had imagined he would leave once the child was safe, he realized that the queen's insistence was more than formality, more than tradition. It was a deep claim forged in the moment. He had lifted that panel and carried the child through the smoke, claim that the queen did not offer lightly. And as he walked beside her, surrounded by her escort, he began to understand that this world had woven him into its story in a way he could not easily escape. And the queen seemed to sense his uncertainty, because she slowed her pace and spoke with a quieter tone, telling him that he would have a place among them, a place of honor and respect, a place near her side, for she recognized something rare in him, something she valued in leaders and guardians alike. And though he did not yet grasp what that role would become, she made it clear that she would not let him vanish into the stars, that she would hold him to the bond created on that burning ship, and that from this day forward his life and hers would be intertwined by choice, by duty, and by a connection she would not loosen. And so Rian continued forward, feeling the weight of destiny shifting around him as the alien city opened its gates and the queen walked beside him, her presence steady and resolute, while the child at his other side clung to his hand with quiet trust as the wind swept behind them, carrying away the last traces of smoke from the wreck and heralding the beginning of a new path. One the queen had already decided he would walk with her,